Level 1. The intake and the fee. The truck stops and the heat enters before the light does. Not the heat of the sun, the heat of 400 bodies compressed into a space built for half that. A wet, dense biological heat that reaches a point where it stops being temperature and becomes a condition of the atmosphere itself, like pressure at depth underwater. You breathe it before you see anything. The first thing your body learns about this place, it learns through your lungs. They pull you off the truck, wrists cuffed to 3 other men. The guard who receives you doesn't look at your eyes. He looks at your file. He looks at the numbers. You are a number now, a number with a sentence, a risk classification, and a charge that functions in this system the way a business card functions in any other. Its value will be calculated in the next 48 hours. Processing takes 4 hours. They strip you down. They hand you an institutional khaki uniform that smelled like something before you put it on and now smells like that something and like you at the same time. They photograph you. They take your prints. A doctor who never looks up from his forms asks about your medical history and writes down answers in boxes that already had marks in them before you spoke. Then they walk you to the block. The door of the block is the real threshold. Not the prison gate, not the intake booth. This door, because on the other side of this door, the real system begins. The one that appears in no regulation. The one with no official uniform, but with more effective authority over every square inch of this space than any institution the Mexican state has ever built. There is a man waiting for you. He's not a guard. He's wearing the same khaki you are, but he wears it differently, with the specific ease of someone who has lived in this place for years, because this place is his home. He's in his mid-30s. His movements have an economy to them that belongs to a man who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone in this space, because everything here already knows exactly who he is. He explains the rules. Not as a request, not as a suggestion. He explains them with the same neutral efficiency someone uses to explain how a household appliance works. There are fees here. The intake fee buys you the right not to be beaten in the first 24 hours while you get oriented. The space fee buys you 1 square meter of floor for your mat. The water fee grants you access to the second-row faucet during distribution hours. There is a fee for the bathroom. A fee for sleeping with both legs fully extended. A fee for not sleeping against the back wall, which reaches 108 degrees in summer, and in winter sweats a moisture that soaks through clothing and never fully dries. You ask how much. He gives you a number. You don't have that number. You tell him so. He looks at you for a moment that lasts exactly as long as it needs to last for you to understand the geometry of your situation. He tells you that you can get it, that almost everyone can get it. That family can make deposits. That, if you don't have family who can deposit, there is work available. The work has its own economy, its own hierarchy, its own cost. And the cost of having no money in this place is always paid some other way. But it is always paid. That is the first thing you learn. Everything here has a price. The only question is what currency you use to pay it. Level 2. The shadow government. The guards lock the block door at 6 in the evening. After that, the state disappears. Not because the guards stop existing. They exist. They're in their towers, their booths, their posts with their uniforms and their logbooks. But inside the blocks, inside the space where you live and eat and sleep and survive, the institution with effective authority is not one that the Mexican government acknowledges in any official document anywhere. What runs this place has a name. The men inside call it the Autogobierno, the self-government, and the word is not ironic. It is accurate. This is not a recent phenomenon. It is not the product of a single crisis or an administrative failure that could be corrected with sufficient political will and a budget allocation. It is an architecture that has been under construction for decades, layer by layer, adapting, finding the space between what the formal system can control and what it cannot or chooses not to. It is a parallel state with its own constitution, its own judges, its own tax collection mechanisms, and its own law enforcement methods. The fact that none of those methods appear in any legal framework does not make them less effective. In many cases, it makes them more so. The structure becomes legible once you learn to read it. At the top is the block boss. They don't call him that out loud. He has a name, a nickname, a history. What you need to understand is that his authority derives from no institutional appointment. It comes from a combination of cartel affiliation, a documented record of historical violence, external connections that reach through the walls and into operational criminal networks, and the simple mechanics of having survived in this space longer than almost anyone else. That time has given him knowledge, relationships, and a reputation that makes the cost of challenging him higher than almost anyone can afford to pay. Below him there is a command structure that mirrors, with local variations, the structure of whichever cartel controls the facility. Not every prison belongs to the same organization. Some are Gulf Cartel territory. Some are Sinaloa. Some are contested ground where the internal hierarchy reflects the external war with a precision that any conflict analyst would immediately recognize. When there is a power shift on the outside, there are consequences on the inside. When a cartel splinters or goes to war with itself, blood is shed in the block. The inside and the outside are not separate worlds. They are the same world with walls built through the middle. You understand this in your second week. There is a morning where the dynamic of the space changes before you can articulate what changed. The men who always eat together at the back table aren't together. Attention moves through the block like electrical current you can feel but not see. That afternoon in the yard, there is an episode of violence that is over in under 2 minutes, and that leaves a result which the guards record in language that describes the fact that something occurred without describing what it was. Nobody talks about it afterward. The silence is also part of the system. You learn to read it the same way you learn to read everything else here, by paying attention to what is present and what is conspicuously absent. Level 3. The interior economy. The money inside this place is not the money of the outside world. There is a parallel economy operating within these walls, with its own value scale, its own means of exchange, and its own market rules that function with an efficiency any economist would recognize, though none would admit to it in a peer-reviewed journal. The informal market here has been optimized over decades. It is responsive to supply and demand. It punishes non-payment with a consistency that any collection agency would envy. The deposits your family makes from outside convert into credit inside the system. With that credit, you can buy from the informal stores that operate within the block, stocked with items that shouldn't be here and are here, because the guard who brought them in also has his cut in the chain. You can buy food that isn't the institutional ration, which is unspecified animal protein served with a quantity of salt that functions as a flavor suppressor rather than a seasoning. You can buy a cell phone for 50 times what it would cost on the street. You can buy information. You can buy protection on limited terms under conditions that get renegotiated at a frequency specifically calibrated to maximize the provider's income. The phone is the circulatory system of everything. With a phone, you stay connected to your family, and you receive the money that feeds your ability to pay the fees that determine the quality of your existence here. But the phone is also how the block bosses maintain operations on the outside. Extortion networks are coordinated from inside these walls. Criminal logistics are managed through these devices. Instructions travel from men serving 20-year sentences to free people in cities hours away. The paradox is not lost on anyone who chooses to see it clearly. The state incarcerates the operators of organized crime in facilities from which they can continue operating, with varying degrees of fluency, depending on custody level and the health of the internal corruption economy. You learn all of this when they offer you work. The work is simple in its description. You carry messages, not in writing, in your head. from one block to another during authorized movement periods, in the moments of contact the formal system permits, and that the informal system exploits with a creativity refined over decades of practice. You say yes because the alternative is failing to pay the fee, and failing to pay the fee has consequences you've seen clearly enough to complete the calculation without needing much deliberation. You start working. The moment you start working, you stop being simply someone serving a sentence here. You become part of the system. That transition is irreversible in ways you don't fully understand yet, but you're starting to sense the shape of them. Level 4. The hierarchy of suffering. This place has a taxonomy of pain that determines who receives it and in what measure. At the bottom is the man with nothing, no affiliation, no money, no one on the outside who answers calls on his behalf, no skill that gives him value in the informal economy. He arrived alone and he occupies no position in any structure. The system processes that absence as an invitation. He absorbs the violence that the block needs to discharge somewhere, the tension that accumulates and requires a release point. He gets the worst sleeping spot. He draws the most degrading tasks. When pressure builds and the structure needs an outlet, the outlet passes through him more often than through anyone else. This is not arbitrary. It is the arithmetic of powerlessness applied with precision. You don't become that man because you arrived with something. Not much, but something. A distant relative who knows someone whose affiliation carries weight here. That was enough for the man at the block door to explain the fee structure to you on your first day, rather than simply collect the first payment in a different currency. That was it. A conversation instead of something worse. In this place, a conversation instead of something worse is a form of good fortune that deserves to be recognized as such. Over time, you learn the categories. There are the men with direct cartel affiliation who control the block. Their protection is proportional to how high they sit in that structure. There are the men with indirect affiliation, like you, who pay the fee but aren't targets of opportunity. There are the men who have no affiliation but have money, who purchase a negotiated neutrality that holds as long as the money flows and dissolves the moment it stops. There are the men who have neither affiliation nor money but possess a specific skill. The cook, the tailor, the man who reads and writes well enough to draft petitions and legal letters, who maintain their position through utility. And then there are the men who have none of the above. You learn not to look at them too long. Not because you don't care, because looking too long serves nothing and costs you the emotional distance you need to function here. That distance is not cruelty. It is a survival tool the same as any other. You learn to use it the same way you learn to use everything else this place teaches. Out of necessity, without ceremony, with the quiet efficiency of someone who has stopped having the luxury of deciding whether or not to adapt. Level 5. The cartel's soldier. At 4 months in, they make you a more direct offer, not from the man at the door, from someone above him, which is itself a communication about how you're being evaluated. The offer is framed as an incorporation into the formal structure, not in those words. In more concrete terms, there is a role with specific responsibilities, specific compensation, and a position in the hierarchy that comes with immediate and visible material benefits. The material benefits are real. A place to sleep that is not the floor. A shared cell with 2 people instead of a block with 140. Access to food that isn't the institutional ration. A level of protection that makes entire categories of threat functionally irrelevant to you on a near-permanent basis. The other side of the arrangement is also real. You have collection responsibilities. There are men in the block who owe fees and aren't paying, and who need someone with the appropriate presence and authority to have a conversation with them about the consequences of continued non-payment. Those conversations have a specific grammar, a progression. The first one is words only. The second includes something that is no longer only words. The third resolves the problem in a way that leaves no ambiguity about what happens if the problem returns. You participate in that grammar. The first week, this feels like a betrayal of something you can't fully name, because naming it would require acknowledging what it was before you came here and who you were before and what value you placed on certain things that are now being renegotiated under this specific pressure in this specific place. By the second week, it doesn't feel like that anymore. By the second week, it feels like the job you have, which is the job that allows you to exist here, in conditions that are different from the conditions of men who don't have the job. That is also something you learn here. Adaptation happens faster than you expected. The body and the mind find a new equilibrium within the new set of parameters, with an efficiency that is, if you don't think too hard about exactly what is adapting to what, genuinely impressive. Level 6. The walls that listen. There is no privacy here in any sense the word carries on the outside. There is no space that is only yours. There is no moment when you are not being observed by someone, and that someone is being observed by someone else. And all of that information flows continuously through a network of relationships and loyalties and debts and resentments that has a complexity you only partially understand, even after months inside it. What you say matters. What you don't say matters more. There are men in this block whose function is to listen, not, obviously, with the discretion of someone who has spent years perfecting the ability to be present in a space without the quality of their presence drawing attention. They process what they hear and what they don't hear, and they build a continuous map of loyalties and tensions and emerging problems, and that information travels up the chain and feeds the decisions of the men at the top. You learn this when someone you thought was an ally turns out to be part of that network, not dramatically. In this place, revelations about who can be trusted are rarely dramatic, because drama is a luxury the economics of survival here cannot support. You learn it sideways, through a conversation with the man at the door where he knows something you said only quietly in what you considered a private exchange. There are no private exchanges here. You file that in the inventory of things you know and that determine how you move, which in this place means literally how you move your body through space, who you walk next to and in what direction, which words you say at what volume in which company. A language built entirely of calibrations. Your family calls from the outside. The conversation has layers. There is what you say, and there is what you cannot say, because the line is being monitored, which everyone knows and everyone accepts as a condition of communication. Your mother asks how you are and you tell her you're fine, because the honest accounting of what the answer to that question actually contains is too detailed and too specific for the 15 minutes you have and for the audience this call has. You tell her you're fine. She knows and doesn't know at the same time. That is also part of the cost this place collects. And it doesn't collect it only from you. Level 7. The boss. There is a morning when the man who runs your block doesn't appear, not dramatically. He is simply absent from his usual position at the usual time, which in a system where behavioral patterns are constant information constitutes a signal that everyone processes simultaneously, though no one verbalizes. The space he leaves is real before anyone occupies it. In the following week, you watch that space get negotiated, not in a single conversation, in dozens of small interactions that are in fact one distributed negotiation stretched across time and space, where different men with different levels of affiliation and history and accumulated debt are positioning themselves within a new configuration whose final shape hasn't been determined yet. You have a position in that negotiation, even though you didn't initiate it. You have it because you've been doing the work for months, and the work has given you visibility, and the visibility has given you a record that someone can read, and a value that someone can calculate. The man who eventually consolidates the vacant position speaks to you privately in his first week of consolidation. He tells you what he expects. He tells you what continues. He tells you your position in the new configuration and the conditions that sustain it. There is a difference between the previous arrangement and this one. Small, but real. In this place, small, real differences are the ones that determine whether you sleep or whether you don't. You accept the conditions. You keep working. Level 8. What it does to the body. 18 months in. Your body keeps the accounting of that time in ways a doctor could read if they examined you carefully. Your skin has the color of someone who doesn't see enough sun. You haven't been to the yard in 3 weeks because the yard is carrying a tension that makes it unwise, and your body understands that open space here is not what open space means anywhere else. There is a knot in the muscle along your right shoulder blade that has been there for months, a product of sleeping on surfaces designed not for rest but for punishment. You don't sleep straight through. You sleep in segments. The body learned to wake at irregular intervals as a monitoring mechanism. Because the environment requires monitoring even during sleep, you learn that this is not paranoia. It is adaptation. The difference between operationally useful vigilance and clinical dysfunction is whether the threats you perceive correspond to real threats in the environment. Here, the threats are real, which means the interrupted sleep you pay for neurologically every night is not a symptom of something going wrong in your psychology. It is evidence that your psychology is calibrated correctly to the actual conditions of the environment you inhabit. You also learn that Rationalization is a survival tool the same as any other. The ability to construct an argument that allows you to continue functioning under conditions your nervous system evaluates as unsustainable is what separates the men still here at 18 months from the men who aren't. You think about your life before with a frequency that has been declining in a way you can measure. At first you thought about it constantly. The tastes, the smells, the specific texture of certain mornings, the people, the future that existed as a real possibility when that future preceded all of this. Now you think about those things less often and in less detail, and there are moments when you have to make a deliberate effort to recall things that 18 months ago were available immediately and involuntarily. That worries you in a way that is different from the immediate worries of this place. It worries you that the adaptation process that allows you to survive here is also modifying who you are in ways that may or may not be reversible when this ends. If it ends. In the formal terms of your sentence, it ends. The sentence has a finish line, but the version of yourself that will exist at that finish line is not identical to the one who crossed the starting one. That cost is also real, and its final number hasn't been calculated yet. Level 9. The line. There are things you haven't done, not because any formal barrier prevented you, but because somewhere in the first months you drew a line and decided that line was the limit of what you would do to survive here, and that crossing it would produce a type of damage that doesn't repair itself the same way the other damages do. The line has been tested. There is a night when the man who runs your block gives you an instruction that lives on the other side of that line. Not in those words, in words that can be interpreted another way if someone needs them to be interpreted another way. But the honest interpretation is clear and you understand it clearly. You say no, not confrontationally. In a way that communicates the refusal without producing a crisis you don't have the capacity to manage. In the specific language you learn in this place for saying certain things, without saying them in ways that require an immediate response. There is a no that creates space for negotiation, and a no that closes it. You use the first one. The result is that there is something you do instead of what you won't do, and that something stays on the correct side of the line, though it is close to the edge, and though the edge is more diffuse than it was when you originally drew it. You monitor that. The line can move in ways you won't perceive if you don't actively monitor it. It can move a millimeter at a time over months until you are on the other side, without having made any single decision that felt like a betrayal in the moment you made it. The gradual crossing is the most dangerous kind because it doesn't announce itself. You monitor where the line is with the same attention you monitor everything else here. That is the most important thing you do in this place. Everything else is survival. This is the attempt to survive in a way that leaves something recoverable when it's over. Level 10. The exit that doesn't exist. Your sentence has an end date. On paper. In the formal system. In the documents your lawyer holds and your family holds, and the penitentiary system holds in some archive that administers the temporality of your presence here. In the reality of the Autogobierno, the date of your sentence is a coordinate that the system controlling this space also knows, and also manages according to its own interests. There are men who completed their formal sentences and did not leave because leaving required negotiating something they could not or would not negotiate. There are men who left before their sentence was complete because the external system coordinated with the internal system to produce that outcome. The release date is not simply a date. It is you build the arguments you'll need to make, and you rehearse them the way you rehearse everything that matters here. In silence, in your head, in the moments of relative quiet you find in the early hours of the morning, when the block sleeps in its layers of breath and snoring. The day arrives. You stand at the same door you entered 2 years and 4 months ago. On the other side is a street, and on that street is a member of your family waiting for you. And behind that person is a world that kept happening while you were absent. A world you now have to find a way to inhabit again. The guard opens the door. You walk out. The heat outside is different from the heat inside, but your body takes a moment to register the difference. Because for 2 years and 4 months, the heat inside was the only heat that existed, and the body learns these things with a fidelity that doesn't release quickly. You walk toward the person waiting for you. In your pocket there is a phone number someone gave you in the last week. The man who gave it to you didn't need to explain what it was for. You didn't need to ask. It is part of the negotiation that allowed you to walk out today instead of some other day, in these conditions instead of others. The system that existed inside those walls did not end when you crossed the door. It changed shape. You walk toward your family's car, and the sun is overhead, and the street has noise, and there are people moving through it with the freedom of not monitoring every angle of their surroundings, and you watch them with an attention you recognize as the same attention you built inside, and that you don't have a switch for anymore. You get in the car. Your family looks at you. You look at them. There is a silence that lasts as long as it needs to last, for everyone to understand that the version of yourself that will step out of this car when you arrive wherever you're going is not identical to the one that got in. That what happened inside those walls over 2 years and 4 months left something in you that doesn't have a name yet, but has weight and has shape and will go with you wherever you go. Nobody says it. Nobody needs to. The car starts. The prison recedes in the mirror. The number in your pocket stays with you.